Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. I'm your host, Keith Powell, and today we have with us Colin Cartwright. Colin is an author, writer from Canal Flats. Great to have you on the show today, Colin.
Yep, thank you.
So Colin, you're a prolific writer. This is your third book that you've put out in the last few years, and the new one is just out, and it's called A Trail That Needs Riding.
Yeah.
And so it's 40 years of packing and adventure in the Canadian Rockies. And it's full of stories about, you know, your horse trips and packing trips into the mountains in and around Canal Flats and throughout the Rockies. What inspired you to really take those stories and write it into a book?
Well, if I didn't, you know, the thing eventually gets lost. And we wrote journals and so on as we were going, so that, you know, so that we would remember these sort of things. But after a while, the pictures and the journals wouldn't mean a lot to somebody else, just, you know, without some kind of an explanation and to be able to give them, you know, credence to what they really were.
Right.
So.
Well, I know the packing adventures that you did took you way back into the mountains. So we're talking about remote trips here, and you saw some amazing sights and some beautiful, spectacular scenery and so forth. You named the book A Trail That Needs Riding. What's the significance of that name?
Well, many years ago, I knew an old man, cowboy if you want, whatever, and he'd done a lot of backcountry packing and for various outfits, guiding and for the Forest Service and what have you. And he was getting pretty crippled up. And while I was talking to him, he told me of another trip he was going to make. And it was going to take him about a week, and it was going to take him through most of the backcountry of in the Purcells. And he was, you know, his knees were bothering him, and his hip, and you know, this kind of thing, his fingers. And so I asked him, I said, well, you know, considering the condition and so on you're in, why do you keep, you know, going back like that? Well, he thought for a little while, didn't say much, and then finally said, well, I think there's still a trail that needs riding, he said. So that's why.
That's the inspiration for the title.
Yeah.
So that sort of almost runs through the whole entire book, because there's a sense of adventure. You know, you're sort of discovering new things as you go, and some spectacular scenery, as I mentioned, but also the wildlife and the things that you encounter. And we're talking about some pretty, what we'd say, aggressive trips here, in that, you know, you encountered some terrible weather. You encountered all kinds of things on your trips. Can you give us a little bit of a highlight as to some of the stories that you recount in the book?
Well, there's some, of course, that are more spectacular than others, but there's one on a trip to Assiniboine, for example, where I thought it'd be a good idea to put a halter on a moose.
Right.
Well, you know, that turned out to be kind of a foolish thing, but then in the process I got my my shoes wet and set them on a stove to dry, and ended up with one burnt up and so on. So, you know, things like that stand out in memory, and also a number of encounters with some of the wildlife, and some of the things we were caught in winter, in summer snowstorms, for example. The one August we got caught over on Bryant Creek on the Alberta side, and had to cross over Assiniboine in about 10 inches of snow, and this was in August.
Right. So some of these adventures were real adventures. They're quite challenging, weren't they?
Yes, they were, yeah. Yeah.
So Colin, who, I know based on your other books, again, local stories and things that you've written about, who do you think your audience is for the book?
Well, I think it can be just about anybody, even people that don't know anything, you know, really about horse travel or anything like that. I think it'll be an exciting sort of a read, a very interesting read. For people that have done it and been there, you know, are used to horse travel, this kind of thing, they'd be able to read between the lines in some of this, and perhaps get a little more than other people, because they'd be able to understand the dust and the sweat and the cold and a wet saddle, and getting bucked off and things like this. I mean, but even for a person that hadn't experienced it, I think there'll be enough adventure in there for everybody.
Well, the book does move along nicely. The pace of it is really good. And I'm just wondering, when you sat down to, put the book together, did you have a vision as to how many stories you wanted to include, or was that something that sort of was by process of elimination, or how did you come up with the stories that you wanted to include?
Well, we did have, like I said, we wrote on most of the trips. We'd kept a journal. Every day we'd keep a journal in the evening. And then, of course, we took a lot of pictures, so they would correspond with the journal and what have you. So I went through and I picked out what I thought were some of the, the sort of the highlight trips that we'd taken. I think there's 12 trips that I document in there, more or less in their entirety. But there's got to be double that or more that I didn't put in for whatever. You can't document everything that ever happened to you, and these were covered a lot. Most of the territory we covered, and so on, and some of the more exciting things that we got into.
Well, you know what? It sounds like you've got the basis for a trail needs writing too.
That's possible, yeah. Yeah.
So tell me, Colin, when you're writing the book and putting the stories together, you almost, one of the really unique things in the book is that you've got 15 original poems in the book.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, how do you sort of go from the story to writing the poem? How does that work?
Well, to me, there's some things, particularly feelings or stuff like that, I found that you can't really accurately put them into prose. It doesn't make as much sense. Whereas this kind of encompasses the feelings that you want and covers a certain amount of events that they obviously all occurred because of some event or another, and or that type of thing. And I think it just gives a better feel for some of the things. For example, the one of those that came before, for example, was I was sitting out on a slide in the middle of the summer, and you get this odd feeling that there's something there or something, and so on, and that's where the seed of that started, and so on. But that wouldn't, how would you explain that in prose?
Right.
It just wouldn't come out the same.
Right. So I have to say the stories and the poems go together so nicely, and I think they you sort of play off of each other and add to the element of the story. And I agree with you that your poems or your poetry allows you to sort of put in the emotion of the moment, and they seem to be very immediate and very very emotional in that it's got a story to tell, but in a different format.
Yeah, and that's the way I see it too. That's the way I meant it to come out, if that's the best way of putting it.
Yeah, well, good job, because I think you did that. The other thing that really impressed me with your book, and I know you worked hard to include a lot of photographs. I would say that the book has got almost 50 photographs in it. So you obviously documented your trips by taking all those photographs. Was it important for you to do that when you were writing, to go back and maybe look at those photos and bring back those memories? Yeah,
well, between that and the journals that we kept, plus the pictures, I could pull out a year which would have all of the pictures and the journal in it, and it was just like I was there yesterday once you start looking at it again. You recall the things, the creeks you crossed, problems you had, things like that. It all comes back once you start putting it together, and I think that's what helped to make it be able to write the stories like I did, or the adventures, or whatever you want to call them.
Sure. I've done a fair bit of hiking and so forth in the backcountry. I've never had the opportunity to, pack with a horse or to travel with a horse, and it just seemed to me that it requires a whole lot of organization on your part to make sure that everything goes right and that everything falls into place and whatever. How do you go about making sure that you have a successful trip?
Well, first of all, you got to have the horses, and you have to have good horses, and they have to be, you know, well enough trained, and you have to be capable of handling horses in all kinds of different situations and so on, or at least being able to stay on them. And there's a lot of equipment that is really necessary you have to have, and after a while it just comes naturally, because if you forget some important piece on a trip, you're sure going to remember it for the next one.
Right.
And it takes an awful lot of equipment and expertise and so on to be able to do it. And if you're going to do this, you need to be able to handle horses too. You have to be able to catch them and saddle them, and you have to be able to put a shoe on if you need it.
Right.
You have to be able to pack them, which includes knowing how to throw a diamond.
Right.
And for me, there's a diamond and a double diamond that I used to use. And you have to have at least an idea where you're going.
Right.
We'd haul out a map and just kind of say, well, we think we should be able to go here, so we would go. But at least we had a pretty good idea of where we were. And you can get into some awful conditions, so you have to be prepared. Like, even in the summer, for example, you better have a good winter coat with you. Mm-hmm. You better have at least an axe or two, or more than one axe with you. You better have, you know, be able to light a fire at any time under any kind of conditions. Right. You know, things like that. Eh?
Right. So your experience obviously builds as you go, but it also comes through in the stories that you were well prepared. But even when you're well prepared, things can pop up, and you never can anticipate everything. Colin, I just wanted to ask you one other thing before we wrap up here, and that's the impression when I read the book is that you know, you discovered a whole lot of old cabins and this kind of thing in your travels. How important was it for you to sort of maybe document or talk about that history or that heritage of the region?
Well, some of the things that we found, some of the old cabins were belonged to or were built by an old person that I knew when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of important to sort of go back and sort of trace that and find out where he was, and it gives you an idea of the hardships that they went through back then. Some of the other things like the guides' cabins and things like that, well, I knew all of the guides. Mm-hmm. You know, I personally knew these people and so on. So it was important to me just to know that I'd been in such and such a person's cabin and you know, a person, you know, this sort of thing. Eh?
Yeah. So that really goes back to what you said earlier in the conversation, is that it's important to document this information so that, you know, future generations can read about it as well.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that some of the places that we went are now you're unable to go, for example, with horses, and other places now where we would have rode for 3-4 hours, there's on a trail, or maybe with no trail, now there's a road there.
Right.
So at least it documents the way things were at that time.
Right.
You know, because we're going back now, what, 30, 40 years and
right.
and more in some places. So.
Right. So the new book is A Trail That Needs Riding, and I have to say that I had a role in helping you publish that, and we worked closely together to make sure that it happened. And I have to say, the end product is it looks really good, and it reads really, really good. And I'm really pleased to the fact that, you know, you and I, it took about a year for us to go back and forth to really come up with a product that we were happy with. And so it's like a tribute to the stories that you're able to share. So the new book, as I mentioned, A Trail That Needs Riding. Tell me about the other 2 books that you've written.
Well, the first one I wrote was about the White Swan Road, which was a road I was familiar with from the time that it was built. And all of the significant corners and hills and various things were named over the years by the truckers and the loggers and so on because of something that happened, an accident or whatever it was. So that's documenting that kind of history. And now
it was called Empty on the Swan.
Empty on the Swan.
What was the second book?
The second one was Kootenay Bears, which is just a collection of bear stories that things that had happened, I'd experienced over the years and so on. And in a sense, I maybe should have waited because I've got a whole lot more I could have added to it since. Right. But anyway, I think it makes an interesting read too.
Yeah, no, for sure. Both of the books are really fascinating in that they document so much about our local history and really the significance of it. I'm just going to ask you this, and I sort of asked it earlier, but why do you think it's so important to grab onto these stories or tell these stories so that they're out there and people can read about them?
Well, like I say, it's documenting history, and it gives people, there's people that would have absolutely no idea about, for example, the White Swan Road, or would have no idea about the places that I've been with the horses, or what it's like to work as a guide and this kind of thing. And I think it's important to document that because a lot of that is either lost or going to be lost or fading away. And you know, I just think that's an important thing to do.
Right. And I just want to give a shout out to all the people that accompanied you on your adventures and your trips. You had quite a contingent of people that came with you over the years, but you sort of had a core that you sort of could depend on. Did that sort of solidify that relationship that you had?
Oh yeah, yeah. When you're out for, you know, say a 10-day trip out in the middle of somewhere that you don't even know where you're at half the time, and you get into all kinds of predicaments. And with horses, there's always something that's happening, and you know, you're cutting trail, and you got mud holes, you've got creeks, you've got weather, you've got animals problems, bears, and various things, and it gets after a while that everybody relies on everybody else, and with the people that I traveled with, everybody was willing to take on anything that happened at any time. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, oh well, just a minute, just wait, it's your job, it's my job, it's whatever. You know, the only thing that they wouldn't let me do was make the coffee.
And was there a reason for that?
Well, when a scoop is good, I put in about a half a pound, and you couldn't even hardly stir it. It was so thick. And after that, you know, I'd say, well, I'll make the coffee. And no, there's something else we got you.
Yeah.
So
True cowboy coffee, right?
Cowboy coffee, yeah. Spruce needles and ashes floating around in it.
Well, thank you for being our guest on Talking Kootenay Books, Colin. Again, the book is A Trail That Needs Riding. You've documented 40 years of high adventure and packing in the Canadian Rockies, done a marvelous job, and lots of great photos, and I love your poetry as well. So thank you for documenting for us, and I know your audience is going to enjoy reading the book. Thank you again.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Keith, and thanks for helping out with the book.
You're welcome. My name is Keith Powell, and this has been Talking Kootenay Books. Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm your host. On Talking Kootenay Books, we have the opportunity of talking to writers and authors throughout the region. And today we're going to expand our scope a little bit, and we've invited Karin von Wittgenstein from the Kimberley Public Library. Karin, what is your role at the library?
I'm a library director at the Kimberley Public Library, have been for about 13 years now.
Okay, so what does that involve? What do you do every day?
Oh, what do I do every day? You know, being a director of a public library is a wonderful position to explore the community, to encourage the community's growth, collaborate.
So let's specifically talk about your role as a director and the operations, day-to-day operations. How does the library operate? Who funds it? What's the governance model? So forth.
We're a municipal library, so City of Kimberley is our major funder, our main funder. We're also funded by the province with the Ministry of Education, Libraries Branch. RDAK is a large funder as well and supporter, and we're also funded by our patrons through donations and the Friends of the Public Library. They're very generous every year, giving us a grant for wonderful opportunities for programming, for furniture, and for other things is mainly what the Friends of the Library provide.
I notice they have a a tremendous used bookstore, so they must provide a bit of a support through that as well, right?
That's their main fundraiser, and actually that bookstore is quite a destination for many people in outlying communities, so it's a really successful little hub of activity for sure.
Yeah. I have to say I've contributed a few dollars to used books there too.
There you go.
They've got a good selection, so it's always nice to visit that. So maybe typically, let's just go to an annual number. How many people may visit the library in a year?
I would say, I can tell you by circulation of physical items of over 50,000.
Wow.
So we're still actually circulating, but visits for computer visits, we have about, well, I'm speaking pre-COVID days, 700 in a month computer users. So the public computers are a pretty vital service that we offer. Yeah, but...
Okay. And let's just talk about normal times. In normal times, what kind of services would you provide beyond just people checking out books?
One-on-one technology assistance, always assistance with the computers, programming, in-house programming, and we do outreach for our people that can't come to the library. We bring the library to them. Lots of different services for different age groups. We partner with schools, and some of our services we take right into the schools and serve a larger group all at once with that.
So Karin, you've sort of highlighted it just in your last couple of comments, but why is a local public library so important to a community?
A library is an essential service to a community. It helps build the community. It's a resource that anybody of any background, any income, of any situation can come without any concern for judgment or having to spend money. It's just essential. It's hard to...
Great resource, and I like
Yeah.
the fact that it's a level playing field. It's accessible by everybody, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I just wanted to also explore the fact that, you know, and I have to thank you for this because you've been very generous in supporting local writers and authors. Is that something that you sort of go out of your way to do?
I do. I look at every author as a VIP, and that's the reason we have libraries, is because people write those wonderful novels and books and resources, and so every author I do actually treat as a VIP, yourself included. So.
Well, thank you. We certainly appreciate it. I wanted to ask you about the sort of the umbrella organizations that represent libraries. So we've got one in the Kootenays, and then we have a provincial one. How does that all work?
The Kootenay Library Federation it's not a governing body, it's basically a support for the different Kootenay libraries. So there's 19, or I think now 20 libraries that are included in the Kootenay Library Federation
So does that allow you to interact with other libraries?
Yes, and it's an incredible resource for learning with and from your colleagues, and professional development opportunities. We purchase things collaboratively, so we save money. The larger organization is the Association of British Columbia Public Library Directors, or thank goodness, ABCPLD, it's a little simpler. And throughout COVID, we have worked together much more just collaboratively, regularly, and that has been a wonderful learning and supportive resource, is that association.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a flip side to every challengers and opportunities. So it looks like you've taken those opportunities to maybe connect with not only the community, but also your professional associates as well.
Yes, it's been extremely valuable.
Yeah. Karin, thank you for being our guest on Talking Kootenay Books. I really appreciate it, giving us an insight into what a public or community library is all about. We appreciate your work.
Thank you very much.
This is Talking Kootenay Books, and my name is Keith Powell.